Adelaide Augusta Nichols Eaton, and I grew up in Searsport, and lots of the Nichols have lived here for generations. So even when you go up the street a while, you're going to meet a cousin of mine. But I have not spent most of my life in Searsport. Most of my adult life was spent sailing the ocean around the world with my husband Oscar. We left right after I was married, and even when my son was 2 in 1876, we were in Hamburg. And then in 1881, my husband had a new ship, the bark Penobscot, and we were sailing to the Orient. It was going to be a multi-year trip, and I and my little boy, we were prepared for the journey. And we sailed off, and the first place we stopped was in Angiers, which is on the island of Java. And that was a wonderful place to stop. It was the first time you got to land, and it was a place where ships typically came to take on water and other supplies. And so there were ships going east and there were ships going west. And the advantage for us was if you met a ship that was going west, you could give them letters, and they could take letters home to your family so they could know that you were that way, you were halfway across. Anyway, we left Angiers and we were heading for Singapore, which was going to be our next stop. Unfortunately, I never made it to Singapore. We got to the harbor, to the outer harbor, on October 29th, and I was taken ill, and my husband called a doctor, and he came out from the shore and treated me as best he could, but by November 4th, I had died, without ever getting ashore. My husband wrote in his logbook that day, November 4th, Addie died today. And I'm sure that must have been terribly hard for him, because suddenly he was there with a 7-year-old son and no wife to take care of him. And just in general, I'm sure it was hard for him. In any case, they buried my body on the mainland, and I was dressed as in Chinese custom in my oldest and shabbiest dress. I'm not sure I like that very much, but I was. And then Oscar and Eddie sailed off on the rest of the journey, first to India, and then back to New York, and then home to Searsport. 2 years later, Oscar made an agreement with a British sea captain who was coming from Singapore and back to New York, and he arranged for them to bring my body home to Searsport. So my body was loaded in a lead casket, all sealed up. I'm sure it was, well, we won't think about that. And it came to New York, and Oscar went and fetched it so he could bring it home to be buried in the cemetery here in Searsport. The captain wouldn't take any money from Oscar for having done this. I'm sure he was just doing it out of the goodness of his heart, even though it was a heavy cargo. But anyway, Oscar gave the captain's wife my gold brooch and my earrings, and now you get to see the picture in my portrait that's in the museum. I am wearing that beautiful gold brooch and the earrings that matched it. In some ways, I suppose I should be selfish, I'm actually glad that they didn't go to his second wife. Although she did raise my son, and I have to give her credit because he grew up to be a very prosperous young man, and filled my husband's life. So that's my story, and I hope that I hope it never happens to you, but enjoy the rest of your trip, and you'll meet some more, as I said, you'll meet some of my neighbors, some of my relatives, when you go up the road a little bit. So thank you very much.
My name is Josiah Colcord. I'm going to tell you about events that happened back in 1862 when I was master of the M.J. Colcord out of New York. And you may remember that in 1862 we were having that little bit of unpleasantness with those gentlemen from the South who decided they'd rather destroy our country than let their slaves go. And I was carrying a cargo of goods from New York to South Africa. Some of the northern merchants had decided that they would you may remember that we had the blockade going on, so a lot of the mills in England had been shut down for want of cotton, and they decided to send relief to the workers who had been hurt by that, and they also decided at the same time they'd send some to South Africa. So they hired the M.J. Colcord, was carrying mostly foodstuffs, flour and bacon, things like that, clothing, some medicines, and we were on our way, departed New York at the beginning of March, and were off the Caribbean when one evening saw smoke on the horizon. Smoke very quickly turned into a steamship, and the steamship turned into the rebel steamship Florida, commanded by that pirate Maffitt, John Newland Maffitt. He was an officer in the United States Navy before he decided his oath wasn't worth a darn, and you may imagine he was quite happy when he found out what he'd caught. So he took my crew and put them aboard the Florida, left me and my wife aboard the M.J. Colcord with some of his men to tender, and a couple days later, he ran down a Danish vessel, and he decided that the Danish vessel would be just right for carrying all of us, and he persuaded the master of the Danish ship, you may imagine how he persuaded him, to load us all on board, and he made free with all the cargo of the M.J. Colcord to give us foodstuffs to feed us on the way home. And then he wrecked and burned the Colcord, which is a hard blow. Not only she was a fine ship, I was also part owner, 1132nd, which, as you may know, is a common method. Ownership spreads the risk out a bit. And Danish ship took us into St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands, and then from there we made our way home. And I'm happy to say I was not out of work for long. I was given another command before too long. And 2 years later, in 1864, Maffitt fell ill. I think he inhaled too much smoke from burning vessels and had to give up command of the Florida. And well, the fellow he gave up command to also fell ill. And the third man was cruising off the coast of Brazil when he had a bit of trouble with his crew. They decided they wanted to mutiny, and he put into the port of Bahia. And while he was there, the USS Wachusett, a steam sloop of the U.S. Navy, came by and decided that it was too good a chance to pass up, and he went in and did what they call a cutting-out expedition. He went in and captured the Florida and took her home. Now, this was not exactly legal. All right, it was completely illegal. It was a violation of the laws of neutrality, and Brazil wasn't very happy about it, and so they brought a complaint, and they were all set to hand the Florida back to Brazil, who would have handed it back to the Confederates when there was a most unfortunate accident. U.S. Army transport collided with the Florida, and unfortunately it sent it right to the bottom. It was a terrible shame. Right, no, it wasn't. It was a great thing, but that's my own opinion. And that's my story.
Good evening. My name is Miss Lucy, and this is my daughter, Clara. She was very passionate about singing ever since she was a little kid. Her dream was to be a famous opera singer. I was always very supportive of her dreams, but her father was sadly not. They would sail the world together on his ship, and once she decided that she wanted to go off on her own and pursue her dreams, he was not very happy about it. When she was younger, she had a music teacher who he was very skeptical of. I'm not very sure why, but he was. But once she decided to go off on her own and pursue her dreams, he he wasn't very happy about it. I'm guessing it's because he wasn't quite ready to let go of his little girl.
I traveled to Paris and to France in order to sign a contract, which I would debut as the First Lady. This was set to take place in February of 1880, but shortly before I fell ill with typhoid fever. This took my life at the age of 28 before I could fulfill my dreams.
Her father and I were very heartbroken, but I'm very at peace knowing the fact that my little girl is pursuing her dreams in the afterlife.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Abby Clifford, and so she. The ship, I mean. My husband named her after me, and we sailed together on the ship of my namesake. Quite some time before he and I and much of the crew caught yellow fever in a port, and he died. Much of the crew died. I didn't die. I was well enough, almost, to sail the ship, the Abby Clifford, back home, where I remarried, and then my second husband died as well. And I suppose I must have died at some point, because now I'm here, sailing the ship again. I don't really know where I'm going, or if I'm going to get there anytime soon, or how I'm supposed to get there if I don't know where there is. But I do hope I find whatever it is that I am looking for eventually, because this is not how I wanted to spend my afterlife.
Good evening. I'm James W. Blanchard, captain of the bark Trovatore, and coming back to tell you about the tale of her final voyage to the Mediterranean Sea.
I'm Emma Pendleton Blanchard. We've been married a short time, and we have our baby with us on this voyage. The baby's been diagnosed with cholera infantum, and the doctor suggests that we feed her on goat's milk. So we have a goat with us in the foremost cabin.
We also have with us a member of one of the esteemed Searsport captain families, Oliver Park, and he's a second mate, and we are also from Searsport captain families, and so we're a trio. That's it.
I knew Oliver growing up in Searsport. He was from a farming family, and he was farming in Searsport until his father, Captain Park, died. At that point, Oliver decided to go to sea himself to earn more money for the family. He has taken very good care of the family, and being a farmer, he knows how to milk that goat.
As I have assigned him, and also to care for my family and be sure that they stay safe and secure on the journey. So we spent the summer of 1869 on Boston Harbor, as I had the boat re-rigged and full standing rigging restructured to hold up the mast, which was rather unusual for the time. From there, we took on ballast and ran around to New York Harbor and picked up our cargo, which was barreled kerosene headed for Trieste, Austria. We headed out across the Atlantic, went through the Straits of Gibraltar and into the Mediterranean Sea.
I was very glad to see land again, as we had suffered several gales in the crossing.
We headed on into Messina Harbor on the northeast coast of Sicily and anchored there.
I could see the Italian mainland just across the strait.
From there, we went around the boot of Italy and past its heel and up into the Adriatic, as the Trieste is at the far northeast corner. About halfway up, we ran into a severe autumn storm, so bad that we had to reduce sail and just barely edge forward by holding the bow into the wind and the waves. This is called weathering. From there, we were being edged further and further eastward with the effect of the storm. And after 2 days and 2 nights, I was concerned that we would run aground onto the rocky Dalmatian coast.
I had fashioned some oilskin suits for the baby and me. And if we did run aground, Mr. Park was to take us to the topmost cabin.
From there, the next day, we found that it was quite clear and we could see the coast well. We got a nice fair wind that was coming up from behind. And so I ordered all sail full and we quickly went up along the coast and ended in Trieste Harbor. There we unloaded our oily cargo and were thankful that we made it safely that far. We then took on ballast, able to go back to Palermo in the northwest corner of Sicily and take on new cargo there.
It was December 2nd, 1869. We were sailing south. Mr. Park and I were downstairs eating dinner together when I heard James shout, "All hands on deck." Mr. Park ran upstairs, still wearing his slippers.
I had seen that the sky had turned this ugly blackness, and also that as the sun set, there were streaks, strange streaks of copper among the clouds. A squall bore down upon us, and I had called the crew in order to be able to prepare to cut down and away the masts in case we needed to. But just as suddenly, it was quiet and deadly calm and a very eerie silence. We were sucked backwards, so I ordered the yard thrown around. Immediately, a downpouring of seawater and wind rushed down upon us, tearing apart our rigging, throwing yards everywhere, and knocking us, capsizing us over onto our side. We had been hit by a waterspout, which is a tornado at sea.
I was still downstairs, climbed up on the side of the table, and reached up toward the skylight, calling for James.
And I had slid down the line that Mr. Park had dropped right to the skylight and extended my hand and pulled out Emma as trying to free her.
Just then there was another lurch of the boat and we sank into the deep forever.
Hi, I'm Henrietta Packard Gary, and my father was Marlborough Packard, a master builder here in Searsport, who built a lot of the ships here in Searsport, including the SF Hersey. I married Captain Franklin Gary, who was the captain of the ship SF Hersey, and we went on a honeymoon. Now, honeymoon is a loose term. I mean, my husband was working, and I was along for the ride, helping him navigate, do other things. But so it was a working honeymoon, one might say. But we made our way to Australia, and I got to go to the Boxing Day horse races in Australia, and I wore a beautiful dress. I felt like a queen. And Franklin was betting on the horses, and I was cheering them on. Go, go! A lovely day. And little Henrietta Mindoro was born a couple months later in August of that next year. She was born off the Straits of Mindoro in the Philippines. Now, some people in Searsport think it's a little strange to name your child after the place where they were born, but how many Mindoros do you know? So I think she'll carry it well, and I think it's quite fine. Yes. Leaving Manila and heading for New York with the cargo, my husband Franklin died just 3 days out of New York. We almost made it to port for the doctors. He had an inflammation of the bowels, according to the coroner's report, but he had caught a tropical disease probably in the Philippines, and His bowels were irritated, I suppose. But that ship, the SF Hersey, it was cursed. And even though my father built it, I think I can say that. In 1865, Captain Forrest Treat was bringing spars and lumber up to build the ship, and he was lost in the he wasn't lost in the gale, but they were becalmed in the gale, and he spent a couple days on deck as the ship was taking on water, was rescued but lost both his feet, and you can still see him hobbling around town with his two canes. Oh. And then the two previous captains before my dear Franklin died aboard the ship, Charles Waterhouse and his brother Asa. Charles died in Melbourne Harbour over in Australia. Their circumstances are a little murky, but his wife had to put down the mutiny after he died with the ship's cook. Oh, poor woman. And then his brother Asa took over the ship afterwards and was washed overboard in a gale when they were off of Peru. Oh, that ship, it is just so cursed. My poor Franklin. But we're back here in Searsport with my parents. The body was laid to rest. And I hear that the owners are going to sell that ship in Australia, and I say good riddance.
Probably hear about the ship. It was a ghost ship when they found it, then it haunted me the rest of my life. And now I will never rest. Even in my obituary, they had to mention that cursed ship. The people here wouldn't have cared so much maybe if my husband hadn't been on it. My dear, sweet Albert Richardson. His father was a shipbuilder in Stockton Springs. We both grew up there. He helped in the shipyards, but then he decided he wanted the adventure of a life at sea, and he signed up as a sailor. We'd only been married a few years when he signed on as first mate. We'd been married only a few years when he signed on as mate of that terrible ship. Why did he choose that one? But he had sailed with Captain Briggs before. I'm sure that's why you're here. That's why they always come. You want to hear about the Mary Celeste. Launched in Nova Scotia in 1861 under a different name, the Mary Celeste had a series of misfortunes and 10 years later was rebuilt as an American vessel. The first voyage after her rebuild was to Genoa, Italy, with Captain Benjamin Briggs. Captain Briggs brought along his wife and his young daughter on that trip. Along with my husband, there was the second mate, the steward, and 4 German sailors. They sailed out of New York City in November 1872, almost 150 years ago, with a cargo of alcohol in the hold. A month later, the British brigantine Dei Gratia was midway between the Azores Islands and the coast of Portugal. The crew spotted a vessel in the distance. No one was on deck. No one responded to the Dei Gratia's signals. The Dei Gratia sailed closer to investigate. It was the Mary Celeste, and it was abandoned. No one was on board. Not the captain, not his wife, not little Sophia, not the crew, not my dear husband, Albert. The captain and crew of the Dei Gratia looked all over the Mary Celeste. There was no sign of struggle. The cargo of alcohol was still in the hold. The exterior of the ship was in good condition. It had not collided with another ship. It had not struck on a rock or ground. The interior of the ship was in good condition. She could not have encountered any seriously heavy weather. Almost everything appeared to have been left. The seamen's chests, clothes, razors, they were all there. All of the captain's furniture was still in place, even the harmonium. Mrs. Briggs' sewing machine had one of Sophia's garments still under the needle, and a bottle of sewing machine oil was standing upright nearby. In my husband's cabin, they found the log. The last record was 10 days ago. No sign of trouble. Not everything was there. The ship's boat, chronometer, and some paperwork were missing. Perhaps they all left in the boat. Although there was no obvious mess, there was evidence they had left quickly. It was almost as if they had all just stepped out for a moment. There the Mary Celeste floated along with no one on board. What happened to them? Where did they go? I spent my life looking for the answers. The De Gratia towed the Mary Celeste into port at Gibraltar. Under these suspicious circumstances, of course there was an investigation. The hearings began almost immediately. They found a sword, perhaps with blood on it, but the expert said, no, it's not blood. They found no answers. The hearings ended. I've heard that perhaps all on board were enjoying the sun, when suddenly a giant sea serpent reared his head. Too stunned to cry out or move, they were sitting ducks for the monster as he picked them up and ate them one by one. But no, that's nonsense. Perhaps it was that British bunch on the De Gratia. They overtook the Mary Celeste under guise of friendly sails. Then when they boarded the Mary Celeste, they forced everyone into the little boat and left them there in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Then they towed the vessel to Gibraltar and made up that terrible story of an abandoned ship intending to collect a reward for the vessel and cargo. But no, perhaps it was not that. Some have said it was the Germans. Perhaps the crew was not as peaceable as they appeared. They could have mutinied, used that sword to kill Captain and his family, and my dear, sweet Albert. Then thrown the bodies overboard before grabbing the captain's silver and heading to the islands in the boat. But no, if that was the case, they would have found them. It was a ghost ship when they found it, and it haunted me the rest of my life. I could never get away from those questions, the prying eyes. People like you. I will never rest. It was a ghost ship when they found it, and it haunted me the rest of my life. Leave me be.